Marcia Klein. Marcia, good evening. Thank you very much for your time. Before we get to what transpired at that committee meeting today, just looking at Marcus Jooste today, was he the Marcus you've known and written about and heard about throughout the years?
Yes, sorry, we are just, firstly a correction, I was there for Moneyweb. No, he didn't at all. Known as being very arrogant and very sure of himself, he did come across perhaps a bit more, not as arrogant, but certainly not apologetic in any way.
Refusing to take responsibility for anything that went wrong. He's crediting himself for having built a multi-billion rand company that was one of the best in this country.
Yes, absolutely. He tried to paint a picture of a global, although slightly complicated, but very normal business, employing so many people and operating so many shops in so many countries, that was basically hobbled by extraneous factors, and he at length spoke about what those factors were.
Truth be told, no one would have expected Marcus Jooste to apologize profusely and admit to that he is responsible for what happened to Steinhoff. But at least a degree of frankness, and perhaps even if it's to say, with the benefit of hindsight, we could have, or I should have done this instead of the other thing. And none of that happened.
Absolutely, none of that happened. The only things that he was prepared to apologize for were, firstly, trusting his ex-joint venture partner, who shouldered a lot of the blame in his eyes for what happened. He said that this partner had been on a campaign lasting 2 years or so, which had resulted in all of this kind of uncertainty, German tax authorities looking into Steinhoff, etc. And the second blame was on Deloitte, who, in refusing to sign off the accounts and asking for another investigation, had stopped it from revealing its financial results and resulted in the share price drop. His only acknowledgements that he made were that his mistakes were that he trusted his joint venture partner. And he did make one admission that they had maybe grown too fast, but that was literally the extent of his apology.
Now, having listened to what your Christoph Vierses have had to say, your Lachranges, who was the chief financial officer, having listened to what everybody has had to say around what happened, where does all of this take us now? Who do we turn to and say, you've got to do something about wrongs that were clearly committed, for which none of the significant players are prepared to take responsibility?
Yes, exactly. If you listen to all of them, none of them were responsible. I mean, one should ask what they were all earning their money for, because it wasn't for looking after the company or knowing what the company was doing. The Portfolio Committee suggested that it now lies in the hands of the Hawks and the MPA. I think that the only clarity we will ever get is if PwC releases its report of its investigation, where it can maybe actually point a finger at someone, because until then no one is going to take the blame. Everybody had a different story, Visa, Lachranchi and Jooste, but basically their stories were similar in that none of them knew and none of them were to blame, and it was somebody else's fault. So I think the PwC hopefully will come up with exactly what went wrong and who should take responsibility for it.
What do you believe can still be the role of the regulator, for example, in forcing certain questions from certain groups of participants? I'm thinking here of people like Deloitte, for example.
Yes, I think the regulators can play a huge role. The Portfolio Committee did, certainly in last week's committee meeting, point out to the regulators that they weren't doing enough. Regulators turn around and say, only this is our jurisdiction and that isn't our jurisdiction, and therefore our hands are tied. But in the end, no one is doing enough. So yes, I think that the regulators must certainly play a much bigger role. Certainly, well, the auditors, Deloitte did play a role. Deloitte refused to sign and did ask for a further investigation, and Deloitte is now no longer involved, and that's where PwC came in. So I think the PwC can certainly play a role there, and absolutely all the regulators.
Okay. Marcia Klein, thank you very much for your time this evening. She is from Moneyweb. Of course, she was following the events closely today as Marcus Jooste, the former CEO of Steinhoff, appeared before Parliament, but essentially refusing to take responsibility or even to admit that he may have been part of many wrongs that went on at that company, costing workers a great deal of money as well as grief.